Afternoon, everybody. I'm sorry for the technical hitches, and hopefully we'll get the other part of the Greek team with us shortly. But I am delighted today to welcome back Nick Malkoutzis. Nick has been one of the most influential and respected commentators on the Greek crisis. He co-launched MacroPolis in September 2013, is now its editor. And I do think the site, which is a subscription site, is really essential reading for those following political and economic developments in Greece. Manos Giakoumis is the head analyst at MacroPolis, and hopefully he will come on during the call. I'm going to just a couple of words on the format. I'm going to start with some opening remarks by Nick and hopefully Manos, then move to a Q&A, which I will lead. I am head of macroeconomic research here at Oxford Economics. And I've spent a long time on the Greek crisis and got to know Nick very well over that period. Please submit any written questions at any time to Adrienne, and she will record them, and we will try and put them in the right section of the presentation. Also, please do try and stay on mute, as that can cause a bit of an issue. So, Nick, with that in mind, could you please open the remarks?
Well, thanks a lot for inviting me again. I think we'd started off with some reference to the weather last time, and I noticed that you had the title "Hot" from Athens, and okay, certainly hot in political and economic terms, but I can tell you it's a cold and windy day here. As I wrote on Twitter this morning, Tsipras has gone to Russia in search of springtime in relations between Greece and Russia, and I hope he brings the springtime back with him, because it's certainly not here. And as everyone knows, a particularly testing time for his government and Greece in general. We produced a brief paper on the state of the Greek economy a couple of weeks ago for the Friedrich Ebert Foundation here in Athens, a German political foundation who wanted it as a quick guide to where the Greek economy finds itself for German visitors. And the title we used was perhaps not that original, but I think sums up the situation that the perfect storm has hit the Greek economy. And I will just give a very, very quick overview, and obviously we can go into numbers and details as the conversation goes on. Looking at three factors that have been deeply affected by the uncertainty that I would say began probably in September last year and has been peaking since Syriza's election in January. It's had obviously a really serious impact on the fiscal side of things. Revenues in December, January and February below their targets, probably recovering in March a little bit as a result of some extraordinary measures and incentives that were put out there to collect taxes, unpaid taxes. The banking situation, again, as everyone is aware, has been pretty dire. Close to 25 billion euros left Greek bank accounts in the period of just 3 months. Deposit outflows continuing, obviously not at that rate, otherwise that would have been the end of the story, but leaving the Greek banking system in a really precarious position. And lastly, one that's often overlooked is the real economy. And everything that's happened over the last few months has really had an impact there as well, partly because the government is holding back on payments to suppliers, third parties and so on, everything that's non-payroll costs, in order to be able to meet its commitments to the IMF and others. So about 550 million was held back in February, and we think they're holding back around a reported 700 million this month in order to be in a position to pay the IMF and so on. That's having a sort of negative trickle-down effect in the real economy, but also the confidence and the sentiment in the Greek economy is deteriorating rapidly. the Greek economy. Of course, last year was a return to growth after so many years of contraction, but in the fourth quarter it's contracted by 0.7%, and there is, by 0.4%, and there is a fear that we're continuing along those lines in the first quarter of this year. And again, unemployment edging up after several months of being on a downward trend. And any way you look across the board, industry, construction, so on and so forth, is really suffering as a result of what's going on at the moment, the uncertainty. And of course, that's the big question now. Will that uncertainty be resolved in the next few weeks? And I'm sure that's something that we will discuss in the next hour. So I'll leave it there, and we can sort of go into the questions.
Thank you very much, Nick. A nice introduction. Now, I'm going to turn, if I may, in kicking the questions off, to the politics. Now, the way you described, the current downturn, you'd think that the ruling party would really be suffering, but here's, opinion polls, including one that was out earlier the week, the first one in April, and Syriza are, doing fabulously. And maybe you could just put your perspective on that, and why are they doing so well?
Why are they doing? Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, I would add a caveat to that, which is that they are still doing much better than any previous government during the memorandum years, at least, but their support has been waning in the last couple of months. So we started off with approval ratings of around 80%, which were, I think, artificially high. Obviously, that was the post-election euphoria, the kind of honeymoon period, and they've been declining ever since. So they're around 60% now, which is still amazingly high, and I think we've all, to a certain extent, been surprised by that. I think I would base it on 2 or 3 factors. The first one is because you get these kind of ratings also for questions with regards to the negotiations with lenders, and it's very difficult from the outside looking in, and even sometimes from the inside looking out, to see how anyone could judge the course of negotiations as a success so far. Yet what a large part of the Greek public sees is a government which is fighting tooth and nail to avoid a lot of the unpopular measures that the previous governments, its predecessors, succumbed to. So I think they're earning brownie points for that one. I think they are also riding this sort of crest of a wave of the sentiment that says, finally, we have a government who is standing up to the lenders, isn't accepting everything that's put in front of them, and we have a voice again. They're also riding a wave of sort of populism stroke nationalism, which is fed by other things, which include the sort of rhetoric with regards to, harsh rhetoric with regards to what Greece would do if it's put in a tight spot. The whole thing about allowing irregular migrants to travel to the rest of Europe, the discussion about the German Second World War reparations, which is not something new, but has been sort of brought up again, and it has kind of entered this the realm of this sort of nationalist populist discussion. And I think also there is, another factor is that there is a sort of a genuine hope that this government, whether sort of people are devout followers or not, will represent a break from Greece's political past, that this is the moment when Greece cuts the umbilical cord. It's no longer ruled by PASOK and New Democracy, the two parties that have governed since the fall of the dictatorship in the 70s, and it's a chance to at least make a transition to something new. So it's a variety of things coming in there that are keeping support for the government high. Of course, I would contrast that with what's been happening on the ground, which, as I mentioned earlier, is this withdrawal of deposits from the banks, and the figures show that by and large these have been cash withdrawals from relatively small depositors. So it's not, the big companies going in and pulling out their money. It's small depositors taking out their money because of a lack of confidence in this government or a concern about where the situation will lead. So there's a bit of a contradiction there.
That's right. The last one's very interesting, Nick. In fact, it gives me a good opportunity to actually say that I'll kind of be doing the questions in 4 groups: politics, fiscal debt, and then the banks. So even if there's a couple of questions coming in on some of the other groups, which I will get round to, but if we can just stick with the politics a little bit more, I'd like to just think about the implications of this support and how robust it is one issue, and then under what circumstances would there be a referendum, and what would it be about? Would it be about the programme or continued membership of the euro? So, how might these things pan out?
It's a good question. I mean, there is a huge amount of uncertainty about the position we find ourselves in. I would say to you that we knew that this government would be unorthodox, would give out mixed messages, would be sort of confusing to even those, not necessarily just to the non-initiated, but even those who have been following things. But what's been really surprising is that as every day has gone by, instead of growing a little more accustomed and a little bit surer of what they're trying to do and what the ultimate goal is, I would say that the opposite. I would say that the opposite has happened. That day by day we're becoming a bit less certain about exactly where this is going to end up or what they're trying to achieve.
But I don't hear anything.
Yeah.
Manos, are you there? I think we've got Manos on the line.
Yeah. I
yes.
could hear his voice there.
Yeah.
Oh. Okay, we'll try and sort out the remaining things. Things are looking promising. But yeah, sorry, Nick, to interrupt.
Yeah. It's a little sort of perplexing, and we've arrived at this point with the Eurogroup on the April 24th seeming as a sort of a watershed point, by which time some kind of framework for an agreement must be in place, but with no certainty that it will be. And if it's not, or if there is an agreement which this government finds difficult to swallow, then what will happen? And certainly the possibility of elections or a referendum have been floating around. It was interesting, there was an opinion poll a couple of days ago asking the question about, if we have 3 choices, if the agreement with the Eurozone isn't the one that Greece is looking for, do we accept it? Do we go to elections, or should there be a referendum? And by far the most popular choice was a referendum. And this has been floated by the government a number of times, and then they've kind of stepped back from it without really discussing in detail what would be the question put to the Greek public. It's very difficult to see how it could be anything than, do we accept the deal and stay in the Eurozone, or do we return to our own currency? And that's all nice in theory, but I don't see, given where we are now, especially with the fragility of the banking sector, how you could have any kind of vote, whether it's a referendum or whether it's elections, to agree to a deal or not without shutting down the banks, without heavy capital
well, this
control.
is the interesting thing, Nick, isn't it? I mean, and We've just got a question on the very issue of what would happen, what would need to happen for the support for the euro to fall off. And I guess it's very hard for anybody to know this, but probably you're in a better position than anybody. What would it take? If it was that ELA got shut off and deposits got frozen, what do Greeks think? What are they thinking about that situation? Is that in the news? Would that cause a fall in support for the euro?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. Obviously, support for the euro remains strong. It's probably been sort of ebbing away a little bit in the last couple of years, but certainly is the clear majority opinion that Greece has to remain into the euro. I would say that going back to the days before the election and sort of mulling over what could be the outcome of the new government, and I had a sense then that if things went wrong and, say, capital controls had to come in relatively quickly, that this would turn the mood against the new government, that they would be held responsible for making a mess of the situation, and that it would probably lead to their downfall. Having seen how the moods developed in the 2 or 3 months since then, I would say that it's quite likely that we would have an opposite swing, in the sense that if capital controls came in, for instance, and the government made this out to be a move by the lenders to further ratchet up the pressure on Greece, I could see the mood turning against the Eurozone very, very quickly and quite easily, actually. And I would put it, the contrast being that rather than protesters being outside Parliament demanding for the government to step down, they would be, protesting outside the European Commission offices or somewhere else. I think that's the kind of mood that's been generated now. It's been fed to some extent by sort of more populist statements from the Syriza and more nationalist statements from the independent Greeks, the right-wing party in the coalition. And I could see something like that, some kind of shock to the system in the weeks to come, certainly denting the support for the euro quite a lot. Whether it would be enough to suggest that in a referendum you could have a no vote against remaining in the euro, I'm not sure, but it would certainly make it closer.
Very interesting. If just on a related issue on the politics, there's been a lot of talk in the press over, trips to Moscow, and as you mentioned, the issue of the inquiries into the programme, and then German war reparations. And do you see this as mainly frothy issues, or do you see a greater significance in the overall narrative of how Greece gets itself out or into the crisis?
I think this is sort of just part of the confused picture that the government is giving out, where it's approaching all of these issues at the same time, rather than having a very clear strategy about what it wants to achieve and how it can achieve it. As I said, the German reparations issue is something that has existed for some time. In fact, Greek governments have been discussing this issue since the 1950s, so in that sense it's nothing new, and it's worth pointing out that the previous government set up a committee to look into this a couple of years ago, and the figure that came out the other day, about 280 billion, was a figure put together by a committee at the General State Accounting Office, which I think their work was initiated by the previous government. And it certainly wasn't a demand by the Greek government towards Berlin as it was portrayed in some of the media. It was simply a figure that the alternate finance minister put before a parliamentary committee that asked him about it. And this figure also includes private claims, not just state claims. So I think there's a lot of sort of confusion surrounding that issue. The move to the Tsipras' trip to Russia today, again, sort of being portrayed as a move to play off Russia against the Eurozone. I think it's probably sort of more nuanced than that. As you know, Russia has an embargo in place against Greek fruit and vegetable, as it does against the other countries, and that's a serious blow to the agricultural sector in Greece. So he's there sort of exploring if anything can be done on that. I mean, I don't think there's any serious approach towards Russia for some kind of loan. There may be deals be done in the energy sector and so on. I think he wants to show to the domestic audience, but also to the international audience, that, okay, I'm in this negotiating process, but I still want to be a sovereign state leader. I want to decide my foreign policy. I wanted to see where I can develop trade, and I'll go to Russia, I'll go to China as well, and I can't restrict myself just to sitting down at the negotiating table with the Eurozone. The parliamentary inquiries into the memorandums, the two memorandums, and also into the creation of Greece's debt. I think this is just sort of a bit of domestic political theatre rather than anything else. Yeah. I don't think there is any real substance to it. I mean, you know, Greece has had numerous parliamentary inquiries. They usually don't lead anywhere. The only interesting aspect of it this time is that the parliamentary speaker, Zoe Konstantopoulou, who is a member of Syriza, seems to have decided that she's really going to bump up the importance of her role, and she is heading one of those inquiries, and has also kind of gone off the reservation in the sense that she is behaving in Parliament with in a very sort of dictatorial fashion that has upset even Tsipras. Apparently, and she's using what is an institutional role, which is supposed to be non-partisan, essentially, to deliver this very sort of populist message that spreads across from the far left to the far right. And there is a fear there that she is possibly trying to carve out some political space for herself should Tsipras be forced to make some kind of compromise with the Eurozone, which will be interesting because one of the difficulties that Tsipras has is, you know, if he is going to be forced to back down on a lot of things, how will the left wing of his party react? And one of the questions there is, will it be isolated MPs walking out? Will it be a mass walkout which will be grouped around a specific figure? And it will be interesting to see if Konstantopoulou is positioning herself as the kind of figure who can lead the Syriza rebellion, if there is one in the future.
Thanks, Nick. Yeah. So just to clarify a couple of things, I think Manos may be in a position to join us now. But just on the referendum issue, so we've got another a question, a follow-up question. Was I don't know if you want to answer this. Actually, it's quite direct. If capital controls are implemented, would that lead to Greeks choosing no votes for a bailout or a no for Euro membership?
Yeah.
So I don't know, that's a very direct question. I don't know if you and Manos have a firm view.
Look, as I said before, I think that a situation in which there are capital controls in Greece would polarize the atmosphere even more than it is now. it would, I think, and depending on how the government also portrays such a move, it would turn a lot of people against Greece's Eurozone partners. So I think the possibilities of having a referendum under capital controls in which people say, to hell with this, we'll go back to the drachma increases. I don't know, as I said before, whether it's enough to secure a no vote, but it would certainly make it closer. The other thing to bear in mind is that the Greek constitution bans fiscal issues from being put to a referendum. So, for instance, it's very doubtful that the government could have a referendum on, do you accept the Eurozone deal or not? It would obviously have to be a currency issue, and I mean, the fact that you go that far, I think, means that the question of whether Greece stays in the euro or not would have to be at the heart of the question.
Do you hear me? Yes.
Oh, sorry, Nick. I believe you may not have heard this.
No, sorry.
Okay. Just turning to the chart to the picture of the banks, which you can see here, and obviously the position has got quite bad recently. These are our own forecasts of the LA going forward a couple of months, not too controversial. But I wonder if you could just say a little bit about A, how tight things are in the banks, B, what that is doing to the Greek economy.
Okay, if Manos is there, I'll let him field this question.
Hi.
Hi, Manos. Good to hear you.
Hi, Gabriel. Greek banks are currently facing very restrained.
Oh, Manos, can you speak a bit closer to the microphone? It's hard to hear you.
Yeah. Do you hear me now?
Yeah, you'll have to speak louder.
Okay. Greek banks are currently in a very restrained liquidity position since they have suffered huge losses of around 25 billion the December to March to February, this 3-month period. According to press reports, another 3 billion were withdrawn in March. The official figures will be actually disclosed at the end of this month. And at the same time, they were forced to resort to the ELA funding to the ELA mechanism of the Bank of Greece for liquidity. So, starting from January with small amounts, they topped.
So, Manos, you're very quiet again. If you could just speak loudly.
Actually, the microphone is not performing so well. Do you hear me now?
That's much better, yeah.
That's better.
Okay, I unplugged the microphone. Well, so in February, Greek banks' ELA funding jumped to 66 billion euros, and this was the first time it reached these levels over the past 2 years. The current ELA limit that has been set by the ECB is at 71.8 billion, meaning that compared to the end February figure, there was a liquidity buffer of around 6 billion euros. As I said before, around 3 billion euros were the outflows in March. So at this particular time, and especially after March 20, I think, the positive withdrawals have actually accelerated after an almost 3-week period after the February 20 Eurogroup when they have stalled. There are conflicting press reports about the current amount of weekly withdrawals. They are talking about something around 100 to 150 million per week, but this is very difficult to confirm because depositor sentiment has been hurt seriously over the past 3 to 4 months. And
Manos, if I can just interrupt there a second, for you or Nick, I mean, one thing that always has surprised me is not maybe that so many depositors withdraw, but so many keep their money in. You know, why is it that, in spite of everything, you know, why is deposit withdrawals not faster? I mean, I think the one thing we've never seen in the Greek crisis is just a real flood, a systemic flood out. What would it take for that to happen, do you think?
What bankers have disclosed recently is some characteristics of this.
Manos, if you can just get closer to the computer again, please.
What bankers have recently disclosed are the characteristics of these 25 billion withdrawals compared to the previous huge outflows of 90 billion before June 2012 elections. And the main differences are that almost 2/3 came from households, and 3/4 of this 25 billion were in the form of banknotes and short-term instruments. My understanding is that, let's say, the smart money or the large accounts have withdrawn their money back before June 2012. Now there are not, let's say, so much deposits as at that time and at that period, and mostly current outflows refer to households, meaning amounts less than 100,000 euros and probably even at much lower levels. So these withdrawals are probably on a daily basis, on a permanent basis every day, but with very small amounts, which if you sum them up, they do not make such a huge difference, a huge amount in terms of total outflows.
That's very interesting. And yet, but no sign of any cues yet, and still a certain amount of calmness. If
I can just add something on that.
Sure.
I think that one of the things to factor in is that, you know, Greece is in the 5th year of this situation now, and you know, people have been sort of scared a number of times during that period, and in each case it's turned out to be a false alarm. I mean, not in the sense that the threat or the fears were not well founded, but in the sense that in the end the whole show just sort of rumbled along in the end, and there was no reason to panic about deposits. So I think that has to be factored into the equation, to the way people are thinking, is that this is just another time that Greece is under pressure, that it's running out of money, and in the end some solution will be found, and that as a result some people are not touching their money. And I think also some people feel that in the current situation with the new government, that the lenders are exercising extra pressure on this government because of its politics, because it is being more resistant to the measures that they would like to see implemented, and that ultimately this is a negotiating tactic and no one is going to take the risk of pulling the plug.
Very interesting, Nick. Now, if I can turn just to, I'm sure a table which you'll be very familiar with the numbers here. It's the debt redemptions. Of course, the one in a couple of days' time has got a lot of press, and it now seems that's going to be paid to the IMF. But in general, I mean, there's 2 points I just make at the table as introduction. Is there's a huge amount. The total you see at the bottom right, 10 billion of debt redemptions, not including treasury bills, by August. And I guess the question for you is, I mean, you guys have written a lot about all the ever more creative ways the Greek government is making these debt redemptions. And perhaps you could say where you think the real pressures lie in terms of this table, or do you think they can get through the whole lot? Or do you think an agreement can be reached by then ultimately?
Yeah. Manos, do you want to go on that one?
Yeah, certainly. Actually, I want to add on this on this particular numbers that since almost 50% of the T-bill maturities, of the 6-month T-bill maturities that actually occurred in March, April, and May. May is the last one. Half of these maturities were held of these securities were held by foreign investors, and those investors are not acquiring T-bills anymore. So on top of this 10 billion that you mentioned, we had, for example, today another 700 million that had to be rolled over by Greek, let's say, investors and not banks, not Greek banks. And these were mostly covered by cash reserves of state-controlled companies that under a mutual benefit account at the Bank of Greece, the state was able to cover, to roll over this 700 million out of the total of 1.4 billion that was due to be covered. And next month, in May, we have the same issue with the 6-month rollover of 1.4 billion and also a 700 million, additional 700 million have to be rolled over or, let's say, acquired by Greek investors. So the main source of funding for the state at the moment is the cash reserves of state-controlled companies or local governments or even state-controlled companies that are under indirect state control stake, and these are the main funding sources. On top, Greece, the state had received 640 million euros from the Bank of Greece dividend at the end of February. This actually was already spent, and before 3 weeks, the state received another 870 million from the Hellenic Financial Stability Fund's cash reserves, which was, I suppose, it was fully used in today's rollover and tomorrow for the payment of the IMF tranche. Apart from those specific funding sources, actually there are not any other available for the Greek state.
Very interesting. So, I mean, do you think it's possible to talk about a hard deadline for the crisis? This is a question from somebody earlier. Or, do you think they're going to run out of creative sources? I mean, I partly say that because the history of capital controls internationally, I think, is that people can be unbelievably creative in finding ways, getting people to surrender export earnings, even if not owned by the state. So, In your opinion, either of you, is there such a thing as a hard deadline for the crisis? Is there any way that they could reach July and August and pay the ECB out?
I don't think that there is any chance for the July and August ECB bond redemptions because those numbers are huge compared to this 1 or 2 billion per month. They are at 6.7 billion for the 2 months, and probably the state may face a severe problem even in May rather than in July, because all these funding sources at some time actually they are exhausted. Just to remind that before 1 year the previous government had indicated at that time that by using cash reserves of the state-controlled companies it could raise around, it could fetch around 5 billion euros. This figure at the end of December jumped to 8.5 billion. At that time, everybody thought that this funding source was exhausted. The new government finds additional cash reserves, but at some time, certainly this amount has, I think it is fully exhausted. We don't know if it's this particular time, but I suppose it could not be later than May.
And just to add to that, Gabriel, I mean, one of the phrases that has come into use over the last couple of months is obviously Graccident instead of Grexit. The accident happens, and this is one of the areas where you have to look, because you could very easily see the situation in which the Greek government believes it's able to scrape together enough to keep meeting its obligations, but finds out one day that it's short, and that then triggers a whole series of events. And I mean, in their search for cash, for instance, they've gone to the social security funds, and some boards of social security funds are not willing to sign off on handing over the cash reserves, because they know if things go wrong that they could be criminally liable for the money that's been lost. So there are obstacles to this as well.
So very interesting. So you think the end of May, so those IMF payments we can see there, there's a big one, well, 0.6 billion mid-June. You think that's probably too far? I think Manos said that, actually.
Yes, I suppose he has taken into account that the state has to find another 700 million for the 6-month T-bill rollover in May, on top of the 1 billion of debt redemptions of mainly to the IMF in May. I think that this additional 1.7 billion in May is a large number at this particular time.
Very interesting. I think my own personal take is just that there's plenty of creativity, I think, still to come. So I'm not sure if it'll be May or June, though. The ECB ones do look very ambitious, but I guess time will tell. I mean, the key thing, of course, is to reach an agreement. So I wonder in the last few minutes if we get. I mean, these I've just taken from your website, and I think you took them from the elite report. And maybe, either of you could just comment a little bit about the possibilities of reaching an agreement. How far are these two sides apart? When it gets down to specifics, can they agree on a primary surplus? What stands in the way?
Yeah. Okay, I'll take a first stab at that. I think that the last set of reform proposals, the reform list that was sent by Athens, was by far the most comprehensive document it's put together in the last, this government has put together in the last 3 months, but also at the same time way short of what creditors were expecting. And I think one of the key areas where there is a problem is in the fact that the Greek side is approaching it in this manner. It says, okay, look, there are some measures that I don't want to take, There are some measures that I want to take, and there are some measures that I may not like that much, but okay, I'm all right with including them. So they've put those measures, the ones that they're satisfied to include, plus the ones they want to take, into a list. They've done calculations, and they've worked out the revenues for all of those. The problem is that a large amount of those measures, at a rough guess, I would say 70, maybe even 80%, are measures which are very difficult to quantify in terms of revenues. So from the conversations we've had from the side of the institutions, there is deep skepticism about whether these measures could perform, whether these measures could get anywhere near the figures that the Greek government is proposing, and as a result are more or less dismissed out of hand. Now this leaves the only option is to implement measures that have a tangible result, and there we're talking about tax rises and spending cuts. And this is where the problems start, because this government could, for instance, accept some kind of rise in VAT, or what they were discussing is a readjustment in VAT levels, so that they drop the 3 band rates and produce one which is around 15%, which could bring in more revenue, would mean some products, services becoming cheaper, others more expensive. But if then you start going into cutting auxiliary pensions, you enter territory where it's very difficult for them to accept not just the fiscal terms, but also in ideological terms. And I would highlight 3 areas where this government is going to have difficulty reaching agreement with its lenders, and that's pension reform, labour market reform, and privatizations. On all 3 of those, there is a big ideological gap to bridge. In the fiscal terms, I think the gap is conceptual. It's about what measures are needed and where do they get us. And standing where we are now, it seems that this is a huge gap to bridge in the next 2 or 3 weeks, and I really can't see how it's done. I'm not saying it won't be done, but at the moment it seems very difficult to envisage a way which this gap is bridged.
Very interesting, Nick. I mean, one, I guess, follow-up to that would be that if the gap isn't bridgeable by Syriza, yet the Greek population rejected, the previous program, is it even possible for any government, no matter if it's Syriza, some centre-left coalition, or New Democracy, is it possible to implement anything that is acceptable to the Troika? I shouldn't say that word, but I just did. That's
a good question. Look, I think there is a solution here, and there is probably some kind of fudge you could find to at least cover the short term. So, for instance, if you postpone things like sort of pension reform or labour market reform now, and you look at just the sort of cold hard numbers, and you agree on some measures there, and that allows some funding to be released, and then you move the bigger debate to June, which in one way or another is likely to happen, and of course that will be the key moment. And at that time, it's a question of whether this government has sort of matured enough, feels confident enough in its position to carry through a deal with that. And I say the June agreement because in the June agreement there could be other things to counterbalance the nasty stuff. So, for instance, if you're talking about pension reform in June or labour market reform in June, but you're counterbalancing that with some kind of economic stimulus, for instance, or some kind of investment package, if you're counterbalancing it with a clear sort of roadmap to discuss debt relief, then it gives the government something to sell to the domestic audience. And I think the same goes for this government as it would for any other government. So I don't think that there is, at the moment, a very easy political solution to the situation Greece is in. And one of the reasons is that if, say, you get to June and you say there's an agreement on the table, it's very difficult for Syriza to accept it because its left wing won't do so, and we go to elections. I think the only thing that elections will bring is a much more fragmented political landscape. The left wing of Syriza could peel away, form its own movement. So you've got you've got a small group, 4 or 5% radical left. You've got the Communist Party. You've got Syriza, which will be weakened. Independent Greeks, PASOK, Potami, New Democracy. PASOK and New Democracy possibly under new leadership finding their feet. So you've got a situation in which no one is really able to govern.
Sounds sounds tricky. So one last question for you, Nick, which is it's come from somebody on the webinar, and it's basically it relates to, is there a possibility for a bridging agreement? You know, this was the hot debate a little while ago, and now it just seems like we're focused on getting a new programme in June. But is there a possibility for a bridging agreement to gain some time? You know, how do you see the potential for a third bailout after June? And I guess ultimately it does remain the big issue of debt sustainability. So I wonder if you, can comment on the role of those issues going forward.
Okay, Manos, do you want to have a go?
I think that current negotiations are very critical at this juncture. Probably we have to wait until April 24 to get a more clear idea of how all these discussions, either in Brussels or in Athens, are showing progress, and to what extent. And then probably we are going to have a more clear view about the future, since as we said before, the state is running out of cash. There are certain funding needs that have imminently to be covered. And I think that something has to be agreed and bridged certainly before the end of June.
Okay, thank you very much, Manos. Thank you very much, both. We've come to the end of the hour, and so apologies to everyone with the technical problems, but I think I hope you agree that it's so worth it to actually get the view of very informed analysts and commentators on the ground in Athens, because your insights are just really valuable to everyone. So thanks very much, Nick. Thank you, Manos. We wish you, and for that matter Greece, all the best in getting through the next few months and beyond.
Okay, thanks, Gabriel.
Thank you, too.